an anchor in the midst of the storm today. You may be the voice on the other side of that video saying, I got to have something to ground me. I got to have something to give me an anchor. Well, as the lights are coming back up, would you turn to Psalm chapter 91 for me? Okay? Psalm chapter 91, and as you're finding it, I always like to give a couple of lines of history about whatever I'm doing just to kind of give you a context for what's going on. In Psalm chapter 91, it's really an answer to Psalm chapter 90. And if you were to look back at Psalm chapter 90, it's more of a lament about a major disaster, really kind of asking God to take care of us or to take care of his people and have pity on his people. This is believed to be a psalm of Moses. And for those of you who believe that all the psalms were written about David, I'm sorry to burst your bubble today because they're not. They're written by some different people. The majority are known to be written by David, but this one in particular we think is written by Moses. And if you look at Psalm 90, you would think the same thing too. The language of Psalm chapter 91 and Psalm 90 really have a lot of language about that Moses might be talking back in his time. And it also discusses and talks about some of the things that were happening around the time of when Deuteronomy was happening and being written. Okay? So, enough about history. Now, let's get into Psalm chapter 91. And I want to look at this psalm and break it up into about 4 different parts for you today. Well, let's read today the very first couple of verses in Psalm chapter 91. You'll know these verses probably from hearing them from various places. But in Psalm chapter 91, it says, He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. That reminds me of the old Lutheran hymn that says, a mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper he, amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal. There's a couple of important words that I want to bring out to you and kind of give you the definition of here in the first couple of verses of Psalm chapter 91. And the very first word that we want to look at is the word refuge, okay? And if you were to look up the word refuge in Scripture, not in Scripture, in a dictionary, here's what you would find. You would see a definition that would say, a condition of being safe or sheltered from pursuit or danger or trouble. Something providing shelter. And you might even see some synonyms there that say maybe a shelter or protection, safety, security, those kinds of things. And so in the midst of these first couple of verses, the very first thing that we want to look at is that God is my refuge. God is my refuge. Okay? We also can look at the word dwell. All right? We just looked at the word refuge, and now if you look at the word dwell in a dictionary, here's what you would find. The very brief definition of the word dwell is to live in, okay, or to be at a specified place. To live in or to be at a specified place. Again, you've got some synonyms with that you can find in the dictionary that say to reside in or to live or be settled in, to be housed or to stay. Okay? So let's look back at verse 1 and 2 real quick one more time. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. It was a statement of faith by what we believe to be Moses writing this particular song. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I want you to think just to yourself just a minute. How long do you stay in God's presence? How long do you stay in the shelter or in the refuge of the Almighty? Is it a quick trip in the morning? Do you only do it on Sundays? Do you kind of come in it and then come out of it immediately? Is it only maybe a couple of times a month? Or do you dwell there? Do you abide? Do you stay there? Well, if you don't have a place or a time that you do dwell and abide, my thought would be, heaven help us. Because if we don't have a place to experience God's presence, and if we don't have a time every single day that we are desiring to experience God's presence, how can we ever expect to know what He has for us? Many of us don't really have a place because some of us may be too fixed on ourselves and on our own schedules and think, man, we got way too much going on. If I can just spend 5 minutes doing this and do that, then that's going to be okay. And then we really don't listen to what God wants for us. It's sort of we put out our wish list for Him, and then we get out of His presence and go and do our things and hope that He answers all of those questions for us. Paul Tripp wrote a book a few years ago called Awe, A-W-E. And he says this in the book. You see all the dark, sad brokenness in the human community that results in such hurt and pain and disillusionment and disappointment is rooted in a deeper brokenness. Sin, profoundly larger than simply doing the wrong things. Behavioral sin grows out of the malfunctioning, corrupted motivational system of the heart, and you simply cannot live for yourself and stay inside God's boundaries. You cannot live in a greater awe of you than of God and live the way God designed you to live. Let me read that last statement one more time. You cannot live in a greater awe of you than of God and live the way God designed you to live. If our refuge or dwelling place is messed up, then our lives are going to be a mess. Let's look at one more word, and that word is abide. Biblically, abide means to remain stable or in a fixed state. So again, thinking about the word refuge, dwell, and abide, look back at verse 1 one more time. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. He who resides in, he who stays in the shelter of the Most High will abide, will remain stable in the shadow of the Almighty. Isn't that a great statement of faith? Isn't that a great thing for us to think about daily when we get ready to go out into the world, no matter what it is that we have to face in that day? The fact that we know right here that this statement of faith can be as well ours as it was Moses. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. Well, when you do that, let's go a little further. What does the shadow of the Almighty provide for us? Let's look starting in verse 3. Pick up where we left off. For it is He who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence or plague. He will cover you with His pinions or His feathers, and under His wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a bulwark. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or of the destruction that lays waste at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. You'll only look on those things with your eyes, meaning from a distance, as God takes care of you and me. Well, first we saw that God was our refuge, and now we see that God is our protector. Okay? And let's look at that for just a minute. God is my protector. Who delivers us? If you look back in verse 3, who delivers us? The Lord does, right? The Lord. Not Oprah, not Dr. Phil, not Steve Harvey, not Judge Judy, not another pastor, not me, not anything or anyone else can deliver you but the Lord. He is the only one. Not a vice that you keep going back to all of the time. Not a pet sin that you keep going back to that you think, well, this will give me a little bit of pleasure right now, and then I'll come out of it and I'll come back to the Lord. The only thing that can deliver you and me is the Lord. The only thing that can protect you and me is the Lord. When does he protect us? Look at verse 5. You will not be afraid of the terror by night. Do you know what night describes in this verse? Night describes the time between 6 p.m. and midnight. Go to the next verse. Or the arrow that flies by day. The day describes from 6 a.m. to noon. Of the pestilence or plague that stalks in the darkness. Darkness describes the time from midnight to 6 a.m. Or of the destruction that lays waste at noon. Or some of your translations say noonday. And noonday describes the time between noon and 6 p.m. Is there any time of day that wasn't covered there? No. He covers you and me 24/7. He protects us from anything and everything. Funny story. We like to do projects at our house. Some of those projects are school related, some of them are not. We decided to do a project and grow and raise some butterflies. Some of you may have done that before, some of you may not have. It's quite a treat, let me just tell you. You get to see what truly God's creation does in the form of something from a very small, almost a seed-looking thing to a caterpillar to a butterfly. So if you've never done that before, let me kind of explain the process that you see within this story. Okay? Some of you are way too serious this morning. I need this story in here to kind of break it up just a little bit, okay? So actually you can go on Amazon and buy these things. So we did. We went on Amazon, we bought these. We get them home or we get them delivered. Everybody's excited. The kids are excited because they want to be able to see this growth and this thing take place. And so basically what you get is this little, kind of looks like a little petri dish type thing, and so you have these little things in it, and so you watch them over a period of time. And over a period of time, obviously, they become caterpillars. So within about a week or so, you begin to see little forms of caterpillars. Well, once they all come out and once they all are growing, then you put them into this kind of cylinder thing that you can see through. It unzips at the top, and you put these things down in here, and you begin to watch them crawl out, and you begin to watch them kind of make a habitat for their own. And about the only thing you really have to do in there is put water in there, and as they begin to grow, you watch them grow. And so as we begin to do this, now a couple of weeks have gone by again, and you begin to see that the caterpillars are kind of making their way up. Obviously, you know what that's for. The caterpillars are making their way up, and they come to the top, and what do? They spin a cocoon, right? The things that you learned in science class in elementary school, right? So they begin to spin a cocoon, and you watch this take place. You can't touch them, you can't do anything with them, except for just sit there and watch them. So we watch them, the cocoons little by little start to break open, and you see these butterflies begin to come out. Well, you can't do anything with them until all of them have come out. So again, you see one, and then another day you see another, and it takes, again, another week kind of process for all these butterflies to come out. So we've watched this, and now we've spent about 4 or 5 weeks watching these things come out. And we thought, well, now, I think it was getting ready to be my middle daughter's birthday and Melody's birthday, and we thought maybe we can release them on her birthday, and it would be great and whatever. Well, it was raining, and you can't let them go on a rainy day, and you have to wait till the weather's just right. And so we waited for about another 3 or 4 days until we could actually let them go. So the day finally came. So we're talking about a 5 or 6 week process here that we've watched these things grow. So the kids walk out with Krista out into the backyard, and it's time to let them go and unzip the deal, and we're about to let the butterflies go, and one by one they start to go up, and all of a sudden as we watch them from the top of the trees, birds come from the top of the trees and come down and eat them all. Can you imagine the look on my kids' faces as they've watched these things that they have grown, per se, for the last 5 or 6 weeks come and simply be eaten by the birds that are right there above them? Obviously, something that you don't see every day, something that now you can look back on and laugh. Did the butterflies need protection once they got out of their place of refuge? Yeah, they did. Were they fearful? No, because they didn't know any different, okay? Just happened like that, and they got eaten up. So is what some of you call the circle of life, right? They didn't know any better. But listen, sometimes we are fearful of things, right? We get out of our place of refuge, and we are fearful. Fear is a big thing. Fear can do things to us. Fear can immobilize us. Fear can trap us. Fear can haunt us. It can debilitate us. It can keep us from moving forward. It can even keep us from talking to God, the very one who can take us from those things and protect us. Robert Davidson, in a book called The Vitality of Worship, don't worry, you'll never read it. It was a seminary required reading. It's a commentary on the Psalms, but one of the things he says in there about fear is this: indeed, it is fear, not doubt, that is the opposite of faith. It is fear, not doubt, that is the opposite of faith. And so then you might ask the question, well, then where do I get the courage to push forward in faith, to go through when I don't feel protected and I feel like I'm all out on my own? Erwin McManus, who is a pastor at Mosaic Church in California, he says this about courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the absence of self. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the absence of self. You and I need the Lord more than we ever even think that we do. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the absence of self. God working in you and me in each one of these situations. Fear is a powerful thing, but God protects you and me. Let's move down a little further, starting in verse 9. For you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High your dwelling place. Verse 10. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For he will give his angels charge concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will bear you up in their hands, that you do not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread upon the lion and cobra, the young lion and the serpent you will trample down. Now we see God as a provider. Number 3, God is my provider. So what kind of things does he provide? Well, look in verse 9 that we just got through reading. He provides a dwelling place. He provides a place of refuge. Then look in verse 10. What does he provide? He provides protection. We just got through talking about that. But it's something that he provides us. And the next thing he provides in verses 11 through 13, he provides angels. Now, we don't know a ton about angels, but we do know a decent bit about angels through what is said in Scripture. And one of the things that I like to think back to is the old country song, Angels Among Us. Is it true? Yes, there are angels among us. Now, is the whole song biblically true? No. And we're not going to sing that song next week at church or any other time for that matter. But is the concept true? Are there angels among you and me? Yes. There is. And just like we read here in Psalm 91, he will give his angels charge concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will bear you up in their hands, that you do not strike your foot against a stone. In the midst of our dwelling and abiding, God provides countless blessings that we miss out on if we are out of the refuge. Think back to the butterflies, okay? One of the best representations of angels that I've ever seen in a TV show or on a movie. Did you ever see the TV series that came out a few years ago called AD? If you did, they show one of the best representations of angels that I've ever seen. The representations of angels that they give in that series, it's about a 10 or 12 part series. And it's really a pretty accurate series until you get about 10th or 11th episode in there, and then they stretch a few things. But the representation of angels, they are always warriors. They are sword-wielding warriors. I want you to think about that for a second. When you read this verse that says, they will guard you, they will keep you from stumbling, they will take you up in their hands. That says warrior to me all over again. Not only is God fighting for you, but the angels that he has in and around, they're fighting for you and me as well. So we may not see a way out of our situation, but God provides. God is my provider. Let's look at the last few verses 14 through 16. Verse 14 says, because he has loved me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him securely on high because he has known my name. He will call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. With a long life, I will satisfy him and let him see my salvation. Now, does that last verse mean that you're going to live to be 100 years old, and if you don't, then you aren't experiencing the love of the Lord? No. He's talking about eternity here, okay? I will let him see my salvation. You and I both know that there are many people taken from this world far sooner than we think that they ever should have been taken. But it's not because necessarily they didn't love the Lord. I know a lot of people who love the Lord dearly who has ended up leaving this world far sooner than I ever thought that they would. One of my closest seminary buddies, his name is Fred. One of the most godly young men that you would ever meet. Served in every which way that he possibly could at the church that we were in at that point when I was finishing up seminary. Sang on the praise team with me. He even got a deal because he wanted to be there even longer to be able to be a custodian at the church so he could be able to, he felt like that was one of his things that he needed to be able to do. Not long after we were there, he got called to his first church. He had a wife named Rosanna. She played piano for him. It was a small church. He got up, led worship one Sunday morning. And as soon as he sang that last note, he went down on the very front pew and he sat down and he took a deep breath, and that was the last breath he ever took. Fred had just turned 30, 31 at that point in time. And I thought to myself then, Lord, he had so much more to give, and he loved the Lord, and he was showing his love for you through what he was doing. How in the world? Some of those questions we'll never know the answers to. But I wanted to give you that example to let you know that that's not what the psalmist is referring to here. He is referring to eternity in this last verse. There are 6 I will statements right here. Because you love him, the Lord, I will I will deliver you. I will set you securely. I will answer you. I will be with you in trouble. I will rescue you and honor you. You know what honor you means in that verse right there? It means more or less the idea of celebrating you. Think about when the prodigal son came home. I will honor you. And the last one, I will satisfy you with a long life, with eternity. We receive all of this. Every one of these things that we just read and just looked at, these 6 I will statements. We receive all of these if we what? What does the first part of verse 14 say? Because you love me. And then look back in verse 1. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. This is what the shadow of the Almighty provides. Everything that you and I could ever want, everything that you and I could ever think to ask for and not even think to ask for, He provides for you and for me. There was a song several years ago by Stephen Curtis Chapman. Most of you are aware of who Stephen Curtis Chapman is. Been in contemporary Christian music for some 30 years now. And it's funny because I went to a concert of his a couple of years ago, and he made this reference and said, you know, I can date myself back to the fact that when I was making my first cassette, he's been around contemporary Christian music long enough to say, I had my first cassette tape back when he made his first album. And so on one of those first ones, I don't remember exactly which one that it was, he had a song called You're My Hiding Place. You may or may not remember that song, but the first verse of that song goes like this. In the distance, I can see the storm clouds coming my way, and I need to find a shelter before it starts to rain, so I turn and run to you, Lord. You're the only place to go where unfailing love surrounds me when I need it most. And the chorus says, you're my hiding place. Safe in your embrace, I'm protected from the storm that rages. When the waters rise and I run to hide, Lord, in you I find my hiding place. I'm not asking you to take away my troubles, Lord, because it's through the stormy weather I learn to trust you more. So I thank you for your promise. I have come to know your unfailing love surrounds me when I need it most. You're my hiding place. There's another favorite song I have of singer Steve Green. Many of you know that name. Steve Green wrote a song, one of my favorites of his years ago, that's called, Oh, I Want to Know You More. And the words to that song say, just the time I feel that I've been caught in the mire of self, and just the time I feel my mind's been bought by worldly wealth, that's when the breeze begins to blow. I know the Spirit's call, and all my worldly wonderings just melt into His love. And the chorus says, oh, I want to know you more. Deep within my soul, I want to know you. Oh, I want to know you, to feel your heart and to know your mind. Looking in your eyes stirs up within me cries that say, I want to know you. Oh, I want to know you more. The Adult One Sunday School class just got finished going through a study several weeks ago. Well, actually a couple of months ago now. And it was called Goliath Must Fall. And it was a book written by Louis Giglio. And in that book, one of the very first things that Louis points out in that book is this. He brings forth the story of David and Goliath that many of us have heard 100 times probably. Growing up, Sunday school, you probably taught it 100 times. You probably heard messages about it, all of that kind of thing. He points out in the book that too many times we hear messages and teachings and lessons on the idea that David in the story is you and me. And we give lessons and stories about the fact that David walked right into a situation. He had strong faith and he had a lot of courage, and he went right into the battle and he fought the battle and he won it for the Israelites as they're sitting across from the Philistines. And Louis says this: do not continue to think of David as you or me. Think of David as Jesus. You and me may have been sitting back with the rest of the Israelites going, we can't do this. There's no way. We got a big, tall, strong guy sitting in front of us. We got an army sitting in front of us, and there's no way that you and I could ever do that. That's where you and me might be. Think of David as Jesus. What did David do? He fought the battle for them. And did he win? Yeah. He won big. He won big for the army sitting behind him. Jesus does that for you and for me every single day. Your Goliath, your pet sin, your whatever it is that you're doing outside of the shadow of the Almighty, He's already fought the battle for you, and He's already won the battle for you. You don't have to wait on Him to win it. He's already won it. He's already won it. You and me have the security and the courage and the faith and the strength all built in to the person of Jesus. He fights our battles for us. He's already defeated your giant, and He wants you and me to just trust Him for the outcome. In John chapter 16, verse 33, and I'll close with this. John says, "These things I have spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have" what? Overcome the world. He's already won. For you and me to get out of the dwelling place in the refuge, we're just asking for trouble. Whenever we come out of that place, that time that we spend with Him, whenever we come out of that, we're simply asking for trouble. If we come out of that, according to what we just read, will we get all of these things that we just read about? As God is our refuge and our protector and our provider and our deliverer? Maybe a few of them, probably not a lot of them. But if we, as in verse 1, dwell in the shelter of the Most High, then we will abide in the shadow of the Almighty.